They didn't fear your rise. They feared the moment you realized you were never fighting alone, because when the chosen one wakes up, reality rewrites itself. They didn't block you because you were wrong. They blocked you because you were right too soon. They didn't avoid you because you failed. They ran because they felt the shift coming, and deep down, they knew. Once you figured it out, their strategies would shatter. They never had a chance. They were never in control. They were playing loud in a room you already owned in silence. And if this message already feels like a mirror, like I've been inside your mind, it's because this was made for you. Like and subscribe to make sure this gets in front of every other chosen one who's felt the pressure building but hasn't yet put the crown back on. When you engage, it signals the algorithm that this isn't noise. It's alignment. It's time we find each other. So here's your real introduction. You're not angry because you're weak. You're angry because you've been holding back, watching people underestimate you while you quietly carried blueprints for realities they couldn't even imagine. Let's call it what it is. They tried to block you. They closed doors. They spread lies, all while hoping you wouldn't notice how badly your light was disturbing their illusions. This isn't paranoia, it's precision. And every setup they planned was a spotlight on their fear. See, they didn't block you because they thought you were harmless. They blocked you because you're the kind of threat they can't explain. You don't move with noise, but every step you take alters the atmosphere. You don't compete. They can't even play the same game. Your presence alone shakes people who depend on manipulation to feel powerful. That's why they try to silence you, isolate you, drain you, not because you're weak, but because you expose their weakness just by existing. Chosen one, it's time we stop pretending you don't feel it. That pressure in your chest, that tightness before you enter a room. That's not anxiety. That's the force of your power folding space around you. And they sense it. They don't know what it is, but they feel it like static before a lightning strike. You've been haunted by the resistance because you were constructed to disrupt the systems that feed off deception. They didn't design blocking strategies to stop your goals. They designed them to stop your realization. Because once you stop shrinking and start seeing clearly, you become something they can't outwit, outrun, or outlast. This isn't motivation. This is a coded warning to everyone who tried to play chess with the universe's own strategist. You weren't reacting emotionally. You were absorbing data. You weren't breaking down. You were reprogramming. While they were playing roles, you were rewriting outcomes. And let's be very clear, you were never alone. Every silence was filled with strategy. Every delay was divine design. Every time you felt betrayed, you were being aligned. The universe doesn't abandon its chosen. It conceals them in plain sight. So stop with the doubt. Stop questioning the quiet seasons. Stop thinking your isolation meant insignificance. That wasn't abandonment. That was the universe shielding the weapon before the war. They saw it, they felt it, and now they're terrified of what happens when you fully step in. Because here's what haunts your enemies. You were always quiet, but now you're awake. And they know a chosen one at peace with their power is not survivable to anything built on lies. This isn't just about resilience anymore. This is about dominance through clarity, rage with vision, strategy sharpened by storms. You don't just endure blocking strategies, you turn them into proof. Proof that when the universe chooses someone, every move against them becomes a miscalculated prophecy. So stop settling, stop explaining, stop apologizing. They didn't block you by accident. They blocked you out of sheer instinctual fear, because somewhere deep in the energy they pretend not to believe in, they knew. Once you stop doubting yourself, you don't just rise, you take the whole structure with you. So if your blood's heating up and something inside you is whispering, "This message is mine," then don't scroll past this moment. Drop the number 777 in the comments if you've ever had your path blocked, your name doubted, or your silence misunderstood, only to realize you were built to break every single strategy set against you. Like this video, subscribe right now, and help send this signal to every other chosen one who's been walking through shadows with a loaded mind and a locked jaw. This isn't clout, it's a call, and we're finding each other one signal at a time. And now, let's rip it open, step by step. But don't blink, because if you are truly chosen, every section will feel like truth being carved into your bones. If you feel the pull, stay. Don't just listen, remember. Let's get into it. Number 1. They came to block a bullet, but you were a bomb. They came to block a bullet, thinking you were a target, but you were a bomb. And now, every time they hear your name, they flinch like the past is about to explode. Let's be clear, this wasn't defense, this wasn't confusion, this wasn't accident. They intended to block you, they plotted against your progress, whispered behind your back, designed situations to drain your energy. They stacked the odds, tipped the scales, and built walls they thought you'd waste your life trying to climb. But what they never calculated, what they never could calculate, was that you weren't trying to go through their wall. You were engineered to go off. And when you did, the explosion didn't just expose them. It erased the illusion they thought was invincible. See, they assumed you were linear, predictable, another overthinker with potential and no punch. They thought their blocks would break you. They thought you'd retreat, that you'd spiral into self-doubt, that you'd start questioning your place in this world, that maybe this was all in your head. And for a second, you almost did. And that's the part we're going to deal with now. You, chosen one, let me speak directly to you, because it's time to scold you, not coddle you. How dare you look at the rejection and mistake it for failure? How dare you see their silence as absence from the universe? Did you really think the universe chose you, anointed you, and then left you unguarded in enemy territory? You weren't abandoned. You were arming up. You weren't delayed. You were detonating, quietly, perfectly, and every attempt to suppress you was another step toward your explosion point. You thought you were stuck because things slowed down. You thought your plans fell apart because you lacked clarity. But in reality, the universe was clearing the radius, protecting you from premature recognition. Making sure, when you exploded, the blast radius took out every fake alliance and false system around you. That's the difference between average and chosen. The chosen don't rush timing, they trust their pressure. Look around you. The ones who once mocked your stillness are now unsettled by your silence. The ones who counted you out are checking their mirrors at night, wondering if you're still watching, still calculating. And you are. They don't even realize it, but your energy has already cracked their masks. Because here's what they forgot. People don't recover from contact with chosen energy. It lingers. It exposes, it shifts them whether they want it to or not. And now they act weird when you walk in. They pretend not to notice your rise. They try not to mention your name, because your glow reminds them of everything they tried to kill in you and failed. You don't owe them understanding. You don't owe them grace. You owe yourself full ignition. Stop treating your power like it needs permission. You were always meant to disrupt, not just to survive the sabotage, but to vaporize the blueprint they used to design it. When they tried to block you, they weren't just playing defense, they were preparing their own funeral. Because blocking a chosen one isn't resistance, it's activation. It triggers something ancient, something that doesn't react emotionally, but strategically. Think of all the greats who were blocked. Malcolm X wasn't blocked. He was refined in fire. Nelson Mandela wasn't delayed. He was forged in silence. Steve Jobs didn't get fired to fall off. He came back and redefined the world. These weren't stories of failure. They were stories of detonation. And you're not different. You're next. If you've ever wondered why they watched you so closely, it's because they knew what you still refused to accept. They felt the detonation coming. Your timing was divine. Your delay was precision. And their blocks? All they did was give you more energy to compress into the silence. Because the more they blocked, the more pressure you built. And pressure for chosen ones never leaks. It erupts. So let me ask you again, why are you doubting? Why are you apologizing for the force that scares cowards? Why are you explaining your distance, your standards, your awareness? Don't you get it? You don't owe softness to those who threw stone after stone, hoping you'd break. You owe yourself full emergence, because you weren't the target. You were the weapon they didn't see coming. Every block was a confirmation. Every delay was proof. Every time they slammed a door in your face, the universe quietly marked the coordinates for demolition. And now you're here, still standing, sharper than ever, with eyes that don't just see through people, they see through systems. That's not just awareness, that's confirmation. That's how the universe moves through its chosen, subtly, surgically, and without explaining a single step. And let's be real, your enemies don't fear your success. They fear your arrival, because success can be copied, but presence like yours, that kind of frequency haunts people. It can't be taught, it can't be faked. And now that you've stopped doubting and started decoding, your entire existence is a walking reminder of how badly they misjudged you. So no, don't calm down. Don't forgive too fast. Don't second-guess what your silence survived. Be angry, but aim it like a warhead. Be still, but make sure they know the floor under them is cracking. They tried to block a bullet. But what they didn't know, what they never even imagined, was that they were standing on the bomb the whole time. And the moment you decided not to quit, that's when the countdown began. Boom. Number 2. They set traps for a target, not realizing you're the terrain. They set traps thinking you were prey, but you were the ground beneath their feet. Every move they made, you already owned the terrain, and now they're falling into holes they dug for you. They thought you were simple, predictable, reactive, someone they could provoke into self-sabotage. That's how small their thinking was. They built strategies like chess players, but forgot you weren't a piece on the board. You were the board. You watched them scramble, bait you, test your limits with smirks and schemes, trying to measure your breaking point like it was a visible line. What they didn't know? You were tracking every step, every shift in energy, every glitch in their mask. You don't just move in silence, you calculate in silence, and the difference is critical. See, enemies think silence is submission. They think if you're not lashing back, you must be confused or overwhelmed. But when you're chosen, silence is strategy breathing. While they're spending energy on games, you're building systems they won't even recognize until they're trapped inside them. And by the time they realize it wasn't a chess match, it was a maze. You're already out the other side, thriving and unbothered. They set emotional traps. They crafted situations to trigger your past pain, to provoke you into reactions that would justify their twisted narratives. But you didn't give them rage. You gave them clarity. You let their energy reveal more than their words ever could. And that's what broke them. Not that you fought back, but that you never gave them the fight they were planning for. That's what makes the chosen dangerous. You don't chase anything. You watch patterns. You listen beyond words. You map the system and move through it like you've been here before, because you have. Your intelligence doesn't come from schooling, it comes from remembrance, from a depth they can't access, no matter how many books they read or games they play. Let's speak plainly. They underestimated the terrain. They thought you were navigating the system, but you are the source code. You don't react, you recognize, and when they see you not flinching, not folding, not even blinking, that's when panic sets in, because manipulators depend on your confusion. They rely on your need to be understood. But when you sit in your silence, unmoved, and let them implode under the weight of their own performance, that's not silence. That's warfare they'll never understand. And now they're confused, scrambling, slipping into traps they swore were designed for you, watching their alliances fall apart, watching people slowly start to see them for what they are. And the worst part, you're not even doing anything. You're not confronting. You're not campaigning. You're not begging for validation. You're just existing with precision, with presence, with eyes that say everything without speaking a word. You became the terrain, the foundation they tried to exploit but couldn't bend, and now they're haunted by your stillness. They're exhausted from trying to predict what you'll do next, because you're not on their script. You're on alignment. You're on divine frequency, and that can't be manipulated or rushed. Chosen one, let me ask you something. Why did you doubt this? Why did you spend nights wondering if you were overthinking? Why did you shrink your knowing to make room for people who weaponized your depth? Why did you let the enemy's confidence make you question your clarity? You knew from the beginning. You saw it. You felt it. The universe was already downloading the map before the trap was even built. Stop second-guessing what your intuition confirmed. Stop apologizing for seeing too much, too early. You weren't paranoid. You were prepared. You weren't emotional. You were engineering the escape. The only thing you did wrong was hesitate. But let that hesitation end now. Because the truth is, you didn't just survive the trap. You studied it. You turned it into a lesson. And now, the same ones who plotted against you have to walk through the blueprint of their own failure, while you evolve in plain sight. This is why they fear the chosen, not because you shout, but because you see, because you build in silence, because every time they think you're playing their game, they realize you already wrote the exit. You didn't come to play. You came to shift the whole damn landscape. And now they know the terrain they tried to control doesn't belong to them. It never did. It was always you. Number 3. They froze the door, but you own the building. They froze the door thinking they locked you out, but you weren't knocking. You were busy buying the entire building. Now they're stuck guarding a door that no longer matters, while you've already moved the foundation. They thought the door was power. They thought control looked like access, being the one who lets others in or keeps them out. So they froze it, jammed it, blocked it with politics, gossip, ego, manipulation. Thought if they could just delay you long enough, you'd give up. You'd get discouraged. You'd start questioning whether you were ever meant to enter at all. But what they didn't know was that you never needed the door. You were never asking for their validation, their approval, or their platform. You were designing something they couldn't see because it wasn't built in public. See, when you're chosen, your moves don't always make sense to those watching, because your alignment doesn't play by timing they understand. The delay they celebrated as your defeat, it was just the universe running diagnostics. Precision like yours doesn't get rushed. The universe wasn't late. It was removing the weak hinges, rewiring the blueprints, checking for every leak before your rise could begin. And while they were laughing behind closed doors, you were upgrading behind the scenes. That's what they missed, that your silence wasn't weakness, it was construction. Your distance wasn't failure, it was design. They froze you out thinking they'd shut you down, but in reality, all they did was force you to build something of your own. And here's what they're terrified of now. The thing you built is bigger than what they were guarding. Cleaner, louder, more alive. You don't need their access anymore. You became the access point. And now they stand confused, rattled, restless, because they thought freezing a door would freeze your destiny. But chosen ones aren't tied to location. We're tied to intention. You weren't stuck. They were just trying to delay what they couldn't destroy. And while they were busy trying to slow your arrival, what they didn't realize is you were never arriving. You were taking over. Let's talk about how subtle the sabotage was. It wasn't always loud. Sometimes it came dressed in professionalism, in delay emails, in subtle exclusions, in passive-aggressive tone shifts, in fake encouragement with conditions. They thought you wouldn't notice, that you'd chalk it up to bad timing, office politics, maybe next time. But you did notice. You saw everything. You just didn't flinch. Because your power isn't reactive, it's strategic. And the more they tried to deny you, the more they revealed just how scared they were of what would happen if you ever got through. But that's the punchline. They thought getting through was the goal. It wasn't. You weren't built to knock. You were built to construct new structures. That's the curse of the chosen. You don't fit in rooms because you were never meant to sit at their tables. You're meant to design new blueprints that make theirs obsolete. And now, they're still clutching keys to a system that's crumbling while you're already operating on a higher floor. So let me ask you, chosen one, why were you crying over closed doors? Why did you let their rejection make you question your gift? Why did you sit outside something that wasn't worthy of you, thinking maybe you needed to try harder to be allowed in? Do you really think the universe would invest all that power in you just to have it depend on someone else's permission? No. The silence was set up. The block was redirection. The delay wasn't denial. It was a precision upgrade. The universe has never been late for its chosen. It just doesn't reveal its strategy to the unaligned. And now they're starting to see it. They're realizing your delay wasn't weakness. It was positioning. You didn't panic when the door froze. You sat still. You listened. You watched. And while they celebrated their short-term control, you let the universe map out a legacy. Because here's the truth. Power that can be taken away was never real to begin with. The ones who fear your access are always the ones who lack internal power themselves. That's why they guard doors. They don't realize the chosen are builders. You don't knock. You don't beg. You don't wait. You architect. So stop mourning what you never needed. Stop standing outside systems that shrink your vision. You weren't late. You weren't locked out. You weren't forgotten. You were being armed for ownership. Let them keep standing there, holding their little keys, whispering about who's allowed in. Meanwhile, you've already moved the skyline. And that door? Let them keep it. You own the damn building. Number 4. You didn't lose access, you were upgrading coordinates. You didn't lose access, you were being rerouted to coordinates they don't even have clearance to see, and the only reason it felt like loss is because you forgot who was writing your map. They saw the block and thought they won. They watched you lose a connection, an opportunity, a position, and they smiled, convinced you had finally hit your ceiling. But ceilings are only real if you believe the structure was built for you in the first place. You weren't dropped, you were repositioned. And every time they slammed a door, every time they rerouted the path, every time the system said, denied, the universe whispered, we're going higher. They mistook it for a breakdown. You mistook it for a delay. But let's set the record straight right now. You didn't lose access. You were upgrading altitude. the level you were about to step into required new air, new visibility, and new silence. The room they blocked you from, it wasn't big enough for the conversations your presence was born to trigger. The platform they denied you, it wasn't built to handle the weight of your vision. So the block wasn't rejection, it was divine preservation. Because when you're chosen, the universe doesn't just protect you from failure, it protects you from premature exposure. Still, you panicked, you cried, you questioned the process. You thought, why does this keep happening? Why do I get so close only to have it fall apart? And that's where I'm going to scold you, because you knew better. Somewhere in your gut, in that deep, burning space behind your chest, you knew this wasn't the end. You just didn't recognize the detour as design. You couldn't read the code, so you called it a crash. But let me make this clear. Every delay was data, every closed route was rerouting, every setback was uploading a better path, one that didn't just lead you somewhere new, but upgraded who you are when you arrive. That's how the chosen are built. You don't walk straight lines, you follow encoded alignments. While the world obsesses over timing, chosen ones move on trajectory. Think of an aircraft changing altitude mid-flight. To passengers, it feels like turbulence, but to the pilot, it's strategy. You weren't descending, you were shifting elevations. And yes, it was uncomfortable. Yes, it was confusing. But what did you expect? Legacy doesn't come wrapped in comfort. Greatness doesn't walk paved roads. You are not the passenger, you are the system architect. And the moment you start seeing every no as an upgrade in disguise, the power shifts. They thought you'd panic, they thought you'd spiral into depression or desperation, but you didn't. You pivoted, and that pivot, that's the weapon they can't predict. Because when most people hit resistance, they break. But when chosen ones hit resistance, they sharpen. That's why they're afraid of your silence. It doesn't signal confusion, it signals loading. Let me ask you this. Why did you trust the external so easily? Why did you assume that a blocked call or a lost job or a failed connection meant something was wrong with you? Why did you interpret temporary redirection as a final verdict? You, of all people, should have known. Access isn't controlled by man-made systems when the universe is your architect. Your coordinates are sacred, your timing is encrypted. The people who tried to lock you out, they don't even know where you're headed. They're still trying to read a map you've outgrown. And now, you're walking into rooms that weren't even visible from your last position. You were never supposed to stay small. That's why those paths kept collapsing. They weren't punishments, they were interventions. The universe was saying, this road ends here. Trust the pivot. And the moment you stop resisting that pivot is the moment things start making sense. You don't need their access. You need clarity. You don't need their invitation. You need alignment. And the faster you stop mourning routes that expired, the quicker you accelerate into frequencies they can't track. Remember this, chosen ones don't chase opportunity. They become environments. Wherever you go, things move, energy shifts, eyes focus. That's why your journey is different. That's why people try to block it. Not because you were wrong, but because you were always right too early. You weren't late. You were too precise for their timeline. You didn't fall off. You fell into formation. So take this moment right now and reframe it. That door that didn't open, good. It wasn't built for your weight. That call that never came, perfect. You don't take orders, you follow divine trajectory. Next time you feel blocked, stop and ask yourself, what altitude am I being upgraded to? And then smile, because while they're watching the door, you're already soaring above the building. They never had the coordinates anyway. Number 5. They played mental ping pong. You built the table. They played mental ping pong, thinking they could keep you bouncing between doubt and distraction. But you weren't the ball. You were the architect, the table, the floor beneath it, and the blueprint they didn't know they were performing on. They tried to mess with your mind, subtle jabs, mixed signals, passive-aggressive comments, backhanded compliments meant to spark overthinking and self-doubt. It wasn't random, it was calculated psychological warfare, the kind designed to make you second-guess your every move, question your worth, and dilute your instinct. That's how low they operate. They don't build, they provoke, they don't evolve, they manipulate, because they don't possess real power, so they play games with yours. But here's where they messed up. They assumed you were just another thinker, another emotional reactor, another person stuck in loops. They didn't realize you weren't the participant, you were the programmer. While they were hitting the ball back and forth, you were beneath the game, designing the angles, calculating the spin, coding the collapse. That's the difference between pawns and architects. They weaponized confusion, you engineered clarity, and you did it quietly, because chosen ones don't perform mental gymnastics. We design reality grids. You don't respond with emotion. You let the chaos run its course while you silently recalibrate the structure. While they were poking at your ego, trying to get a rise, you rewired the outcome so thoroughly that by the time the dust settled, they couldn't even recognize the ground beneath them. That's what they don't understand. When the chosen go quiet, something is always being rebuilt. Let's get personal now. You, chosen one, you almost fell for it, didn't you? You started thinking maybe you were the problem. Maybe you were being too sensitive, too intense. Maybe they were right and you were just overthinking. That's where they almost won. Not because their tactics were clever, but because you temporarily forgot who you were. You forgot that your mind isn't fragile, it's fortified. You don't break under mental pressure. You study it, flip it, and return it with surgical precision. Let's be real, they can't beat you mentally. That's why they resort to confusion, because when they can't overpower your clarity, they try to scatter it. They create noise, plant seeds of doubt, mimic your energy just enough to pass as authentic, but never deep enough to sustain real presence. They bank on you reacting emotionally so they can blame your power for the very chaos they started. But you didn't give them the show. You didn't spiral. You watched, listened, and every time they poked your pride, thinking they were destabilizing you, you absorbed it like data, like blueprints. They didn't know that every insult, every contradiction, every energy shift was being stored, analyzed, and weaponized as clarity. Because chosen ones don't play the game, they build the arena. So now they're tired, rattled, because their manipulation isn't landing like it used to. Their little tricks aren't pulling the same responses. You've stopped reacting, and now you're just revealing. Their confusion tactics backfire when someone sees patterns instead of problems. They tried to keep you bouncing. Now they're the ones off balance, stumbling around a structure that doesn't respond to emotional manipulation. And let's not skip this truth. You carry a kind of mental gravity that collapses false power. You don't have to argue. Your presence alone exposes contradiction. Your calm confronts their chaos. And that's why they get loud around you. That's why they get defensive when you haven't said a word, because your mind carries an ecosystem of vision, and their survival depends on keeping you doubting it. So let me scold you for a second. Why did you shrink for them? Why did you ever think their noise meant they were winning? They were playing for survival. You were sitting on strategy. You didn't need to prove your intelligence. They felt it. That's why they tried to fracture it. You don't just think, you transmit. You don't need to win arguments. You rewrite frameworks. So stop playing defense in conversations you were never meant to validate. Let them spin. Let them talk. Every word they throw at you only circles back to highlight their own instability. You didn't walk into the room to join the game. You are the system they were unprepared for. The reason their strategies don't work anymore isn't because they got lazy. It's because you upgraded. You no longer react. You redesign. So what now? Now you stand still and let your clarity sharpen. Let your silence rattle the ones who can't thrive without drama. Let them exhaust themselves with games you no longer play. Because at the end of the day, you were never the opponent. They were just shadow boxing inside a space you own. And they can't win against what they can't read. Because while they were playing ping pong, you built the damn table. Number 6. They wanted a reaction, you gave them reflection. They came for fire, but your silence was a mirror, and when they looked into it, what they saw wasn't you. It was themselves. That's what broke them. That's why they keep trying to provoke what they'll never control. They didn't want resolution. They didn't want clarity. They wanted a reaction. They wanted to see you crack, lash out, lose your composure, because your composure is the very thing that makes them feel small. See, people like them don't come into your life to connect. They come to extract, to test, to poke around your mind like it's a machine they can tamper with, then cry foul when it doesn't break like the others. But here's what they didn't expect. You weren't built for performance. You were built for presence. And presence doesn't panic. It reflects. They threw shade. You gave them silence. They twisted narratives. You blinked. They built traps made of tone and timing, hoping to stir your ego into defending itself. But your ego had been evacuated long ago. You weren't defending, you were diagnosing. They wanted energy, something loud, messy, emotional. But all they got was stillness. That was their defeat. That was the checkmate. Because when someone brings chaos and you don't mirror it, they're forced to face why they needed your reaction so badly in the first place. You didn't fight back. You didn't stoop. You didn't entertain their show. And that's what caused the unraveling. Not an insult, not revenge, but reflection. The kind that cuts deeper than any clapback could ever reach. Because what hurts most about the chosen one's silence is that it doesn't just expose lies, it confronts identity. It forces people to look at their contradictions, their insecurity, their manipulation. And trust me, nothing terrifies a fraud more than being silently seen. You showed them themselves. That's the pain they can't articulate. That's the itch they keep scratching but can't soothe. Because your presence isn't just neutral, it's surgical. You walk in the room and things shift. Not because you're doing anything, but because your awareness demands alignment. People either come clean around you or they come unhinged. And when you didn't react, that was the scariest response of all. You see, they expected the same cycle. Push your buttons, watch the storm, trigger your wounds, ride the chaos. But you had outgrown it. You had healed too much, seen too clearly, and moved into a space where their games couldn't reach you anymore. That's when they panicked. Because once you stop feeding manipulators' reactions, they start starving. They thrive on noise. You offered silence, and that silence was a sermon, a verdict, a mirror. So let's pause for a second. Chosen one, why did you almost break for them? Why did you catch yourself rehearsing responses, planning rebuttals, feeling that fire in your chest like it was your job to prove something? Why were you tempted to scream the truth when truth never needed a microphone to be felt? The truth is, you didn't need to argue, because everything false collapses under the weight of consistent clarity, and that's what you are, consistent clarity in human form. No one has to see your point. They'll feel it. In your tone, in your distance, in your refusal to validate their noise. That's what makes you dangerous. Not just that you see through people, but that you don't flinch when the mask drops. They called you cold, too quiet, detached, but what they really meant was unshakable. They wanted a reaction to regain control, but what they got instead was that terrifying moment when a mirror doesn't speak. It just shows. And if you think that didn't hurt them, think again. That quiet moment after their performance, when you just looked at them and said nothing, that was everything. Because it meant you already knew. And here's what makes it worse for them. You weren't even angry. You weren't triggered. You were calm, almost surgical, because you didn't need to destroy them. You just didn't need them anymore. You outgrew the room, outgrew the game, outgrew the entire illusion. And when someone no longer has access to your energy, your mind, your attention, that's a loss they feel more than any insult. So remember this, you don't owe reactions, you owe evolution. You don't owe explanation, you owe presence. And if your presence is too loud for their ego to handle, that's not your burden, that's their mirror cracking. You're not here to convince people of your value. You're here to stand so fully in truth that lies fall apart just trying to stand next to you. They came for noise. They got clarity. They expected a breakdown. They got stillness. They wanted to watch you burn. But instead, you held up the mirror and let them melt in their own reflection. Number 7. They tried to lock you out. But you were the key maker. They tried to lock you out, thinking that would stop you, but they forgot. You're not looking for keys. You are the key maker. You don't wait for doors to open. You build entrances that weren't supposed to exist. They thought denying you access would end the story. They thought if they left you off the list, unfollowed, ignored, or walked away, they could halt your rise. But let's make one thing crystal clear. Chosen ones don't rise because of open doors. They rise because of divine alignment. And alignment doesn't need permission. It doesn't need credentials. It doesn't beg to be let in. It reconstructs the entire room. They locked the doors and called it closure. You went silent and they thought it was defeat. But your silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. While they were celebrating your absence, the universe was planting you deeper. They thought they buried you, but all they did was force the roots to stretch farther. That's the irony. They tried to lock you out, but they were never guarding a throne. They were guarding a chair in a room you were never meant to fit inside. So stop crying over closed doors. You were never meant to beg. Stop wasting energy on access points designed to keep you small. You carry the blueprint, the structural code that makes the entire building possible. Doors aren't the goal. Construction is. And the moment you stop seeing access as validation, you start understanding the real game. They weren't rejecting you. They were reacting to the power you didn't even know you were carrying. You weren't overlooked. You were being aligned. And alignment doesn't always feel comfortable. It often comes disguised as rejection. That's the lesson. Closed doors don't stop the chosen. They simply redirect them toward the path that can hold the weight of their calling. Let them guard the doors. Let them play gatekeeper, because the ones who tried to block your entrance, they're about to watch you own the whole structure. They'll talk about how you came out of nowhere, but we both know you didn't come out of nowhere. You were just waiting for the blueprint to finish downloading. And now that it has, it's time to build what they swore you'd never access. Number 8. They saw your silence as failure, not knowing it was a red dot. They saw your silence and mistook it for failure, but it wasn't retreat. It was a red dot, And now, as they move louder and sloppier, they're starting to realize you were never ignoring them, you were targeting them. They confused your stillness with surrender, thought your quiet meant you had nothing to say, thought your calm meant defeat. But you were never out of the game, you were just loading precision. While they were performing for attention, you were calculating devastation. You weren't trying to be seen, you were lining up the shot. Assassins don't yell, they don't flinch, they don't warn, they sit still, they breathe slow, and they strike at the moment when their enemies are too arrogant to sense the danger anymore. That's what you are, not just wise, not just aware, but strategic to the core. You don't waste movement, you don't move until the outcome is irreversible. They laughed at your silence, they poked at your absence, thought they had power because you weren't clapping back, weren't defending yourself, weren't explaining. But what they didn't understand is that you were never built to beg for understanding. You were built to collapse illusions with surgical force, and your silence, that was the countdown. This is what makes you different. You don't respond with emotion. You respond with clarity. You don't shout your value. You move so deliberately that every step changes the field beneath their feet. And now they're nervous, checking your page, whispering your name, rewriting stories. Not because you said anything, but because your silence made them realize they miscalculated the threat. So let me ask you, chosen one, why were you doubting that stillness? Why did you let their noise convince you that nothing was happening? Everything was happening. The universe wasn't withholding, it was sharpening your scope. Stop measuring your progress by how loud you are. You're not here for attention. You're here to unravel every structure built on underestimating you. They thought you went quiet because you lost, but silence is where chosen ones prepare their most lethal moves. And now, while they scramble to maintain appearances, you've already marked the exit. Because they didn't realize you weren't just observing, you were aiming. Number 9. They argued over the throne while you became the kingdom. They argued over the throne, who deserves it, who earned it, who's loud enough to sit on it. But while they were fighting for a seat, you became the kingdom. You didn't compete for power, you embodied it. They obsessed over control, over position, over appearances, measured themselves by who had the spotlight, who got the title, who got crowned by the crowd. They fought like desperate players in a game designed to keep them hungry for validation. But you didn't play the game. You rewrote it. You didn't climb to the throne. You expanded beyond it. That's what terrifies them. You never needed to win a war to establish power. You just existed in alignment, and everything around you started shifting. While they scrambled for influence, you became the atmosphere where power either survives or suffocates. Because when the chosen one stands in truth, the crown isn't worn, it's felt. And no ceremony, no applause, no hierarchy can compete with presence that carries actual gravity. They thought royalty was about being crowned by people. You were crowned by the universe. And when that happens, you stop needing seats at tables built on ego. You don't ask for validation. You wake up royal. No gold, no jewels. Just silence, clarity, and undeniable weight. That's the real kingdom, the one people enter and feel exposed, the one that reveals false kings just by standing still. They tried to minimize you, dismiss you, mock you for not playing politics, for not scrambling, for not begging to be included. They called you passive, disconnected, not ambitious enough. But ambition looks different when you own your space. You weren't quiet because you didn't want the throne. You were quiet because you are the place where thrones are either tested or torn down. They don't understand how you rose without stepping on anyone, How you became the one they ask for direction without ever chasing attention. How you command loyalty without demanding it. That's because you're not chasing legacy. You are legacy. So stop explaining why you don't play their power games. Stop shrinking just because others are loud. You were never built to argue for a seat. You were designed to be the structure they fight to belong to. Your clarity became the currency. Your presence became the perimeter. And the war over the throne, it doesn't concern you. Because you were never trying to win. You were becoming the place where victory lives. And now that you've seen it clearly, they never stood a chance. Not because you were louder, but because you were always aligned. Every trap, every block, every silence, it all pointed to one truth. You weren't being denied. You were being positioned. So own it now. Walk like the force they feared you'd become. No more shrinking, no more waiting. If this message spoke straight to your core, like this video, subscribe to stay locked in and drop the number 77 in the comments if you've ever felt that quiet power rise inside you. Share this with another chosen one. It's time we rise together.